This is 3ABN Now with John and Rosemary Malkovich.
Thank you for joining us on 3ABN Now. It's an interesting time. You know, we're talking with someone who went out in the mission field and dedicated his life in serving people on the island of Vanuatu. And you know, we're talking here today with Dr. Turnbull. Really great to have you here.
Back again?
Back again, yeah. And if you didn't see the first program, I'd suggest you do, because it's dealing with leadership.
Servant leadership.
Servant leadership,
Yep.
not authoritative leadership as such. So I'm really glad, Mark, that you've come back, because you're going to be sharing the next stage. Once you've taken on a role, what's the process? And we're going to be looking at your church, 𝗪𝗪𝗀𝗀𝗪𝗪𝗀𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗔𝗀𝒑. And so we're going to see what happens when you take on a role. What does it mean? It means finding people and bringing them to the Lord. It's then looking at establishing a church. And then furthermore, it's doing evangelism, because it doesn't just stop with building a church, does it? No. So we're looking forward to going through the process and finding out a little bit about the church and your story in that church. So we're looking forward to that.
I am. I'm especially looking forward to it. Okay, so I'm going to read for you Matthew chapter 20, verse 27. And whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant. That's a nice short 2 lines in my Bible. I was expecting it to go over the page, but it was nice and short.
Yep.
Let him be your servant. So how are you going to unpack that for us then?
That text is quite a revolutionary text, because it's talking about chief or leader, and then it says servant, and those seem to be opposites, don't they? So Jesus introduced an idea that was totally revolutionary. The disciples certainly didn't understand it when he was explaining it to them, but later on they came to understand what servant leadership actually meant. And just to recap what we touched on last time, is that being a servant leader means that you are focused on encouraging other people, asking questions, taking the position of inquiry, like asking questions in order to get things done, helping people to make decisions, and then helping them to stay on track and to persevere in mission. So basically the whole idea of helping people based on the foundation of servant leadership. That's why I like this. This text kind of lays a good foundation for that.
It does.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
If you're a leader, don't try and take on the role of pushing people around.
Yeah, and servant leadership is really it's not a passive thing. Most people think of a servant as some sort of passively taking orders and then doing what they're told type of thing. But servant leadership means you lead, but you lead from the bottom up. So in other words, you're not trying to be sort of overbearing or over the top of people, but you're actually trying to generate strength, generate progress, generate growth, generate direction from a very sort of from a humble point of view. Really.
You're willing to get down and get dirty, along with the people who are below you.
Yeah.
The tendency
to lead.
The tendency can be that even in ministry, you know, you do all the work, you do the coal portering, you do everything. Then once you get to the top, and you become a pastor.
That's right.
Well, that's stop. You don't do that other stuff before. That's for the others to do.
Yeah.
So this servant leadership is when you get to the top.
Yeah.
It means you work just the same. Jesus was that example. He could have been a kingly authority, but he didn't. He took
had
on
nowhere
a humble.
to lay his head.
Yeah.
A servant leader, in my way of thinking, is someone who's got the spirit of service in leading, whether he has a position or not.
That's the one.
And when he has a position, then he regards that as a great opportunity to do as much as he can with that position. So the position becomes a tool. The authority that he gets, or the position, or the influence that he's given, in that position is merely a tool in his hands.
That's right.
Which if he didn't have that tool, he would still be just as comfortable without it, because he's a servant leader. He's not looking for position. He's actually just wanting to serve in that role and trying to serve the body or the corporate.
But because he has that role now,
Yeah.
he can serve to a greater degree.
Yeah,
Because
that's right.
he can influence things
Exactly.
in a better way
Yeah.
to go the direction that God is wanting things to do
Yeah.
and to get God's job done.
Yeah. So servant leadership is not about clashing or conflicting or sort of downplaying the role of authority or having a position in a church or in a ministry or in an entity or corporation or whatever it is. It's about using it in a way that will serve the people who are involved, especially the team. But beyond the team, serving the wider community, serving the whole world really, as much as possible through that capacity or that opportunity.
So you had an opportunity to learn about learning servant leadership and establishing the work where you were. Is that right?
We've had lots of opportunities, but it's kind of like we wear different hats at different times of the day and different times of the week. And one of our roles is we're heavily involved in the church. I'm particularly involved in the church. I'm leading elder of a church. So I'm 𝗪𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗪𝗏 church, and I am really looking forward to telling the story of 𝗪𝗪𝗀𝗀𝗀 because of how bad it was and how good it's become in the way I think. So if it's okay with you, can we just have a look at the pictures? The first slide is showing when we first came to Vanuatu, we worshipped in that building. Now, the back little veranda that we put on the back there wasn't there when we arrived. It was extreme. You can see it's a very small building. It's open. It's kind of thrown together, stones and mud, and it's just a very basic construction. If we can go to the next slide, you can see how low the roof was in there. There's our daughter Kay taking part in one of the services there. And when I stood up to preach, my head was frequently, I had to watch that rafter just there because, it was very low and hot, steamy in there. Can we go to the next slide? So then we decided we were going to build a decent church building, and you can see people digging the foundations and laying blocks. It was a massive job putting those foundations together because it was all of this is done by manpower. There was no cement
So did you make the block? Did you make the block?
A team of people, a group of people did. And so there we are building. If we can go to the next one, I just want everybody to see how we brought in the sand, because there isn't a lot of sand in the area. To make the cement, we had to have sand. There is no such thing as blue metal on that island. We had to actually bring in sand with coral mixed in it to make it work, make the cement work.
The coral was like the blue metal.
Yeah, the blue metal was the coral, and it's a bit weaker than our cement here in Australia, but that's the only thing we have. And then there is another slide of me carrying sand. There you go. There's evidence that I was actually involved in carrying sand. It was a big job. Getting the sand from the boat, we had to carry it a long distance in the boat, and of course we're shoveling sand into bags, putting them on the boat, carrying them on the boat, and then bringing them up to the building site. So it's a lot of work. And then we ended up with this new building, which is a lot of work. That it looks like just a pretty basic church, which it is, but the amount of work that went into that building was unbelievable.
And so much different to the first one.
Yeah, it's just a real blessing. So then fast forward to the next slide, and you see the church packed full of people, baptisms taking place. And in the middle strip there, that photo is outreach programs that are happening in the community. And can I go to the next slide and just share with you the things that made it happen? Because really, this church, it sounds like a great story, doesn't it? This church was it was a very humble building, and we decided to build a decent church building, and then we ended up with this larger church, and it's packed full of people. But what you don't see on the slides, that's those three things. I'll just describe them briefly. The top left is a book that's produced by the North American Division on strategic planning for churches. It's a great resource. I recommend anybody get involved in that. There's the website on Total Member Involvement, which is an initiative of the General Conference to encourage churches to involve everybody. Then above that, there's a little tract that we produced on how total member involvement ended up happening in our church. We call it a quarterly cycle of fellowship evangelism. So what I'd like us to do is unpackage how that actually happened, because what you don't see in the slides is what happened in between.
Yes.
There was a lot of stuff that happened in between. And what I should tell you is that Matavanga Church started out as a total disaster. I'm sorry to say that, but when we went there, the church was extremely dysfunctional. There was a lot of, in Vanuatu it's called backsliding, in other words, church members sort of coming and going and not very committed to the church. There was serious disasters happening with leadership. So many things that were just, it's hard for me to even describe it in words what was going on in that church.
Was there a lot of tension between families or within families? And
a lot of history.
And do they have tribe type things there?
Yes,
in Vanuatu?
tribal
Like in Africa.
stuff going on. And on top of that, there was immorality happening, and there was also misuse of church funds and things like that, and violence, even violence in the church. Most people were quite surprised to hear that, but in actual fact, this church, I would have had to describe it as the worst church in the world. Like, I don't know of any church that had as many issues as this church.
How many people?
And, that was a hard thing to decide, because we had people who were baptized.
You had a roving membership.
The membership was roving. So we were really struggling, because we went there with the idea of being involved in mission, and our specific goal was to go and to assist the church in its mission. And yet we were doing a sort of flying doctor service. We were inviting people to church. We had the school established. There was a lot of good things happening, but we found out something very fundamental and very, very basic, and that is you can't do mission unless the church is in the right condition. Because you can do wonderful things. You can evangelize, you can be friendly to people, but when those people want to make a commitment to the Lord, where are you going to take them? You can't just sort of reach people as an independent atom, and we kind of had a mindset that was kind of individualistic, I think. We went to Vanuatu with this idea that we would do, at least we'll be faithful in our area, we'll do our own thing. But we found out that a church that's full of, the church has got people in it that are doing the right thing is not enough. You need the whole church to be on track in order to do mission and to do evangelism and to reach people.
That's right.
So, and this is where we started getting involved in the leadership of the church, because we started to feel that there was a need. One day, I remember it was several years after we'd been in Vanuatu, and we've been promoting the project and trying to encourage people to support the project. And then just coming to terms with the fact that the church wasn't growing. Was a kind of it was like a horrible admission to make, that in actual fact, we were evangelizing without success. Why? Because the church was dysfunctional. And so one day I went down. We were trying to avoid being involved in the church because we felt like we didn't go to sort of run the church or be too involved. We thought we were going to do our ministry, and that was a good thing to be doing. But in actual fact, the connection between our ministry and the church was not working, because there was a lot of dysfunctional stuff happening in the church. And I think, if we're honest with ourselves, there's a lot of dysfunctional churches around. And so we really prayed about this, and one day I went down to the church, and the pastor had called for a church board meeting, and nobody turned up except for the head elder. And I just remember feeling really sorry for this pastor, and I said to him, I just felt like it's time for us to do something now. And I asked the Lord, and I just said, Lord, what are we going to do? And I spoke to the pastor, and I said, Pastor, can we start praying about this? Can we do something? And I just had this idea of having every quarter having a high Sabbath, a special Sabbath that would involve everybody. Because I heard about this total member involvement from the General Conference, and I was thinking, why don't we try this? Let's try this total member involvement thing. And so we started to implement a quarterly plan in which we would have every Sabbath, we would have one Sabbath that was a special Sabbath. And we started to get really heavily involved. And at that time I was thinking, we really need to look into how a church how do you make a church come alive when it's dead? When it's based on issues and there's a lot of difficulties in the church. That was what was going through my mind. And so we got hold of that book on mission from the North American Division, and in there it describes 4 different types of churches. Basically, the first type of church is a church that's it's a pastor-driven church. You ever been to a church where when the pastor's not doing his thing, the church is sort of collapsing? You ever seen that?
Yeah.
Okay, so they describe in this book the idea of a church being a pastor-driven church. When the pastor's a good man, then the church is a good church. When the pastor's a bit lazy, then the church is a bit lazy. Whatever the pastor does, that's what the church is. The second type of church is an issues-based church, and that kind of that described us to a T. An issues-based church is people don't turn up to the business meeting unless there's an issue, unless there's a hot topic, a hot issue, things have gone wrong, major problems in the church. Then people turn up because they want to sort of be in on what's happening. Another kind of church is a program-based church in which everything is happening, lots of programs, there's this happening and that happening, but the church still doesn't get anywhere because it's not actually fulfilling a purpose, a mission. And then the last one, which is the one that we need, is a mission or a purpose-oriented church. A mission-oriented church, which is a church that puts plans and implements those plans, and then, then you've got mission happening in the church. So we started to pray about this, how are we going to actually make this happen? And we came up with this idea of having, every quarter we have a high Sabbath, which is like our special day in which we invite everybody along and we have a baptism and we work towards a baptism at that point. And we're having baptisms every single quarter, almost every single quarter. We're having baptisms. So that's what's happening. We're really, really discovering how a church can wake up and come out of its, out of being dead with issues.
Yeah, I like the concept of the General Conference with the total member involvement. Yeah. Because I find that that's pretty crucial to getting people involved and doing what you've been able to do. Because without that, we're just, I use the word pew warmers. We go to church. We like to tell stories about others. And I mean, that's really what happens. When you're not totally involved, then there is a problem.
That's it.
And so I think the role that the General Conference has adopted, total member involvement. You'd be surprised, Mark, I say this, I don't know if everybody knows about it here in this South Pacific Division, but I'd encourage you to go on the website, check it out, because if it worked for you out there in Vanuatu, then it'll work for you where you are. And the other thing, Mark, I wanted to ask you, because while you were talking, I was thinking about, why did you choose where you went?
I was wondering the same thing.
Yeah, while you were talking, and I thought I've got to ask that question.
𝗬𝗃 Island.
Yeah, because that's an interesting thing. I'm sure many viewers would like to know.
How did you end up there?
We basically chose to reach the nearest and the neediest, a place that was very needy and very near. And we met you in Western Australia.
That's correct. Yeah, and you were just preparing.
Yeah.
Well,
Did
you were
know,
a doctor then.
Did you know that Vanuatu, 𝗬𝗏 Island where we live, is closer to us here in Morisset than Perth is? It's actually nearer. Yeah, it's closer. Geographically, it's less distance to get to our. So it's a near locality. It's not very far away, and yet the people are so needy there. And so we chose the most needy province, which is the northern province, up towards the Solomons, and we chose the island of 𝗬𝗏 because it's the gateway to those islands in the north, for the medical aviation point of view. But yeah, going to that island, the church there was just a little group of people worshipping, but it was extremely dysfunctional, and there were so many issues. And the only way for us to progress in mission, like our mission was stalling because of the church. So we had to wake up to the responsibility of assisting the church to find its purpose. And so what's happened is, because we've been sort of really praying about this, trying to get people involved, trying to dig into strategic planning, which is basically focusing on mission, making sure the church is focusing on mission, and then implementing something that actually works. Now, you mentioned the total member involvement is quite it's being promoted by the General Conference, and it is kind of something that's been mentioned around the ridges. It's been mentioned around the world for the church to be involved in. But what I notice is it's always on a national scale. It's this great big evangelistic series that's happening, international. It's even crossing national borders. These big programs where people are invited to come and preach, sort of go and preach. Anybody can be involved, and everybody should be involved. I'm not saying it's a good idea, but what I don't hear is how people are implementing total member involvement in their local churches.
That's the one.
Yeah, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
We are implementing total member involvement in the local church, and it's very fruitful.
And you know what? It starts with the leadership in the church. It's the pastors that need to be driving it.
Yeah.
Because people sit and listen, but action only comes when it's driven.
That's it.
And without that, it just falls on deaf ears.
Has to have a point where it is focusing to. We're going to that point. That is our goal. Because if you don't have the goal, what's the use of what you're doing?
This is where servant leadership comes in, because the servant leader recognizes that he can do as much as he wants. He can do all the Bible studies in the world. He can run all the evangelistic programs that a church can possibly fit into the calendar. And he can even have a group of people in the church who are collectively doing the same stuff. He might train up 10 or 15 of them and get everybody in that group very switched on. And that's what often happens in churches that are quite active. There's a core of people, probably about maybe 5 or 10 people who are just doing everything, and they're bending over backwards to do it. But this is not, I don't think this is what we're talking about when we're talking about total member involvement. No. Because total member involvement is actually getting every single church member involved. And if the whole, we've got to think of the church as a body of itself. I learned this when I was looking into corporations and business. At one time I was investigating how corporations work. And I found out that a corporation is actually, the word corporation comes from the Latin corpus, which means a body. And so, for example, a corporation can have its own tax file number. It actually has a legal entity of its own, which is separate from the individuals who are within that corporation. And that's why it can be accountable separately from the individuals. And the individuals who are running it are not accountable for what the corporation is accountable for. For example, in paying duty, paying off loans or whatever if it dissolves. But if we take that line of thought and apply it to the local church, think of the local church as a corporate body. It has an entity, it is an entity of its own accord. It is an individual, it's like an individual which has its own influence. And when we're working with churches, the servant leader is simply serving that body. Not so much serving all the individuals, like going around looking after all the church members. That's a futile exercise of the if the pastor or the minister goes around and just basically takes care of and just spends his whole energy and life looking after the church members. You still haven't got what you need. Total member involvement is serving the body, which means helping that body, that entity, which is separate from the individuals. It's a collective body, helping that body to be totally engaged in mission and to be focused on mission. That's what I believe servant leadership is when you apply it to a local church.
You know, we've talked to different pastors over the time. Things have changed.
Yep.
The idea that the pastor ran the church was just an overseer doing his work, winning souls, and the church ran itself. He was there to be a sort of a guide if there were issues and that. But, you know, that was the role. Every pastor went out and brought people into the church. The church was unified. It was the elders that took charge. They were the ones that ran the church. And I think that's a good model, because I think we've turned it around now, and it has its effect, you know. But
I think a church that's run by elders and then served by the pastor is the best model, because a pastor should be focusing more on the spirituality of the church and also on making sure that the church is spreading out and reaching out into the community.
And we need to be united on the Word of God too. But you know, in all that we're talking about, I think what's crucial is the power of prayer. And you know, the power of prayer, God empowers us. But we need to ask Him. We need to be willing to listen to Him. And so prayer is an essential part in all this servant leadership, in setting up everything. It must be prayer-based.
It's like you said when you were meeting with the pastor, you said, something's got to be done here, we've got to pray.
That's it.
And that's the first port of call, but it's the port of call all the way through, but it's where you've got to start. Lord, what would you have me to do? How are you wanting us to work in this situation to get these church members mobile for you? Once again, you're asking questions.
Exactly.
But you're asking them of the one who knows everything.
That's it. Praying it causes unity as well, doesn't it? And it unites people, but we should be praying for something, not just praying vaguely, but we should be praying for our mission.
Something
the early
specific.
Disciples, when they prayed together in the upper room on the day of Pentecost and the days leading up to it, that time of prayer was focused on mission. The church was the body, the corporate entity, the church, the group of people who constituted that church. They were focusing on the movement that they were to be involved in, to be engaged in. So can I read from 1 Corinthians 12? It talks about, for as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of that one body, being many, are one body, so also is Christ. So in other words, the church is a body. It's a body of believers, and the head is Christ. For as by one Spirit we're all baptized into one body, whether we be Jews or Gentiles, whether we be bond or free, and have been all made to drink into one Spirit. So the idea of a body is very central to the church, isn't it? And so we can't separate this idea of working as a body. We can't splinter off. We can't send a leg off that way and a foot off that, a hand off that way or whatever. We have to work together in order to achieve the goal. And that body is supposed to move. I often emphasize this with my patients, that when somebody is recovering from a serious illness, often it's not possible for them to recover without moving. They have to get up and move. And many times it's that lack of, this is why one of the reasons Jesus said to the paralytic of 38 years was that he said, get up, take up your bed and walk. That willingness to move is a very important part of the healing process. And I think a church that needs to be healed needs to get up and move. It needs to move as a body, and it has to move in time. Can I share with you another quote here about the relationship between timing and purpose? It says here, sometimes various ways and purposes, different modes of operation in connection with the work of God, are about evenly balanced in the mind. And it is at this very point that the nicest discrimination is necessary. And if anything is to be accomplished, if there is any mission to be accomplished, to the purpose, it must be done at the golden moment. The slightest inclination of the weight in the balance should be seen and should determine the matter at once. Long delays tire the angels. So God wants us to move in time. There is a time when he expects his people to move, and the body, that corporate entity which is the church, have got to follow God's timing, because it's providential. God works on time, and his angels work on time, and he expects us to cooperate on time. And we've got to be decisive on time. Isn't that leadership? But it's not somebody pontificating as to what everybody's going to do. It's asking questions, encouraging that body of believers to function as a unit, to function as a body, and to move in cooperation with the angels to accomplish a specific purpose, which is our mission.
Do you know what it reminds me of? If you're not doing what you're talking about, it reminds me of the children of Israel after they've started conquering the promised land. And God is fighting for them and working miracles. And they divide up the land, and they are supposed to continue on conquering their portion of land. But then when you start reading the book of Judges, well, this group here left the people living in that place, and they left the Canaanites here and the Perizzites there, or whoever, and they didn't drive them out, but they put them to servitude. You know, they did something. But
They had to pay tribute.
this group over here did the same with the people in these cities, etc. And then these ones that they left behind became the trap where the idol worship started creeping in. They didn't continue the work with God. They didn't go by God's timetable and rout those cities. They left them there to become a snare and a thorn in the flesh, and they got lazy. They lost the faith of following God and saying, God will give us the victory. Let's go forward. Instead, they sat down. They said, oh no, they're too hard to get, to get them out of here, and we'll just settle down and take it easy. And they lost the plot.
What happened was their personal self-interest started getting in the way of God's purpose. God's purpose was for them to expand continually and to grow and to develop and to reach other places and to basically to conquer the whole world.
And to become the nation that the world would look at and say, wow, what have you got? Who is this God that you follow who has done such amazing things and has a wonderful government going here? But instead they sat down, and so everything unravelled. And that's what it's like in the church if we're not gathering together and saying, hey, believe God can do this. If we step out in faith, let's go forward.
Notice that what was going on was corporate selfishness. Now this is something that's kind of challenging for people in the church to acknowledge, and that is that we can all be selfish as individuals, but much worse, we as a corporate entity, as a church, we can actually express selfishness as a body. And that happens when we start losing our sense of purpose. We forget our mission. We forget what that body is for. You know, if I had selfishness and I kept away from that body and didn't allow the body to be affected by my selfishness, the body could maintain its focus and its purpose. But if I bring my selfishness into the church, and then that church body becomes selfish as a result, or maybe everybody is selfish in the church, then now we have a corporate form of selfishness. The whole thing is rotten. because it's lacking purpose, it's lacking mission. So that's the antithesis of mission. What we have to do to get back on track is to really work hard against this. So what it means is we got to make sure that the programs that we're running in the church don't express corporate selfishness. In other words, they don't give the impression to the community that we're just looking after ourselves. If you're running a social and there's no emphasis on helping people in the community, is it possible that that actually looks like corporate selfishness to the people outside? Remembering the people in the community, when they see the church, they don't see the individual so much. They see this corporate body, the church, and they say, wow, this is what these people are like. And so I think this is why the church is not moving in a lot of places, because we have corporate selfishness happening. We've got churches, whole churches, entire churches that are actually focused on inward interests and are not focused on their purpose and their mission. Isn't that what Israel was? That's what Israel felt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we have some churches where a new person will come, but they very quickly know that they're not welcome. Because
isn't that selfishness?
Because the church doesn't want to grow.
It's basically we're okay as we are. We don't need anybody else in here, and that's the impression they give to people who are coming in. Yeah.
You know, Mark, you talked about your church, 𝗪𝗃𝗀𝗀𝗃 church.
Yeah.
Well, you talked about how dysfunctional it was.
Yeah.
Well, walk us through how it changed, if you can.
Okay. In a nutshell, what happened was we started to form, the elders in the church started to form a very close bond. And we started to meet on a weekly basis. And then every week we still meet every week. Even when I'm overseas, I often Zoom I have called in by phone or Zoomed in order to be part of an elders meeting. We also have, every week we have what we call a discipleship spotlight, which is only 3 minutes, but it happens just before announcements in the church, in the divine service, just before the divine service. And it's hammering the idea of total member involvement on just repeatedly, just non-stop. So every single week the church is reminded that we are all going to be involved. We are all going to be engaged in mission. We also had a strategic planning session with the business meeting. The entire church set a mission statement, set strategic plans for the next 3 years, and then broke it down. And every quarter we lay plans for that quarter ahead of time as a church board, and then we set about accomplishing those goals for the quarter.
So basically what you're doing is people know where the church is going.
Yeah.
That's basically what it's doing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what they can do to be involved.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that is good thinking. Otherwise we just come and sit.
You're getting the members busy.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's been surprising to me how much repetition is required. Because you'd think, you could have a pastor come and preach a good sermon on the topic and that would be done, Tick that box, it's all done, they all understand. It's not the case. This corporate selfishness is such a big problem. It is such a humongous obstacle to mission that the only possible way that you can overcome it is just to repeatedly, constantly remind the church what its mission is and the importance of every single person being involved, and then structuring everything around that concept. And another thing that we did was we simplified our departments to make sure that we didn't have too much stuff happening, because we were at times tending towards being really busy with programs, this and that and this and that. But there was a lack of, the golden thread of purpose was not there. And so...
It was just a matter of being busy?
Being too
something?
busy to be a mission or in a church is not necessarily a busy church. It's just a church that's really, really focused, and they can actually do less programs, do less and accomplish more by having a bigger focus. And our focus is on using fellowship itself as the evangelistic tool. So what we're doing is every quarter we break the church into groups what we call home church. And we actually shut the doors of the church, and we decide as a church to allocate different members to different. We split the church into 3 or 4 groups who all worship in a home, a strategically chosen home on that particular Sabbath, and invite friends and neighbors. And that works. We have 4 times as much members attending on Sabbath on the home church day than we do on a normal Sabbath.
So that's like one Sabbath a month?
One Sabbath a quarter. One Sabbath
Mm.
a quarter we have what's called home church. We also have an outreach Sabbath where we shut the doors of the church and everybody visits companies, which is another thing again, established companies. And then we have what we call high Sabbath, which is where we bring everybody in. We literally involve everybody. And we sit down as a church board and we make sure that every single person is involved on that day.
Mm.
And it's been just recently we did this, and when we got home, my daughter Kay, she was typing up the list of everybody, the list of responsibilities that was allocated to each individual. She went through the list and she said, I said to her, "Have we got everybody on the list?" And she said, "Yes, except Dad, there's one person missing." And I said, "Who's that?" And she said, "You. You're the one that we forgot to put you on the list." So we were so busy allocating everybody else, we actually forgot some of the key people, Yeah. So this is what total member involvement is. Mm. We are not there trying to promote our presence
and just a few
in church.
People. You get everyone doing something.
And you know what? One
Even
of the
if
worst.
It's an usher or at the door to welcome
Greeter.
people, someone.
We have combined lunch. We have people involved in the lunch. We have afternoon program. The whole thing. We pack names into every single responsibility that we can find.
In a setting like ours where people turn up in their cars, you could allocate people to go and greet people at their cars when they turn up.
Yeah.
We're so happy to have you at our church today. Thank you for coming. If you go to this door, someone will help you, whatever. That would be a job that a few people could have.
I just feel like this concept will work anywhere because it's based on a very biblical foundation, which is that we're using fellowship itself as the medium of outreach and encouraging people to invite people to. We also have small groups. During the lockdown when we had coronavirus and we didn't have long lockdowns like there was in Australia, but we had a couple of months there where we were not supposed to have church fellowship. But during that time, we arranged the church into small groups, and we had increasing offerings. We had an increase in membership, increase in attendance than any other time in our history as a church. And then after the lockdowns, when we all came back together, the church just filled up. So it was just so gratifying to see this. We're having baptisms on a regular basis, and I really believe that this whole idea of involving every single person in the church, using the fellowship itself as the evangelistic tool, strategic planning, keeping focused, helping the church as a body, looking at the church as an entity of itself, and then looking after that entity, looking after that body. Is it moving? Does it have a direction? Does it know where it's going? Making sure that all the church members are aware what their corporate structure is supposed to be doing. Because if we're too individualistic, we're too focused on this individual's problems and that problem and this issue and that, we get bogged. I think having focus on the corporate body. Can I just read Philippians 3:14? It says, "I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus." That's the focus, isn't it? A church without a mission is not going to work. It's not going to work.
I just have a question. You're talking about where you have one Sabbath a quarter where you have home churches and you allocate.
Yeah.
Is it the same people meeting every one of those home church Sabbaths per quarter, or do you mix the groups up? So that it's different people.
We mix them up.
Yeah, which I think is a good idea.
We combine small groups to do the home church. So the home church is actually, it is like church. It feels like church, but it's a simplified program. It's a program that's adapted towards visitors.
Visitors, yeah.
It doesn't have, it's not too rigid, and there's no preaching as well. There's a Bible study in it, but there's actually more testimonies and more prayer, and then there's a visitation. So it's actually focused more towards a visitor's sort of understanding.
I think it's.
But we combine small groups to do it.
I think it's good if you mix people up at different times, so that different people within the church get to spend time with different people that they don't, that they haven't spent the time with necessarily before, and that way within the church people get to know each other better. And so the church will function in a more harmonious way as people become more friendly with other church members they don't normally necessarily get a chance to speak to.
There is a tendency, like in the church, that you sort of find people that click with you, so I can use that word. And the others, you might be attending that church and you may never have been to their home or know very much about them. So the concept of getting to know people through this method is...
You can have your small group, but that small group stays its own small group. And doesn't necessarily reach out, you know, the individuals don't necessarily reach out to or get involved with other church members who are in other small groups.
One of the things that sort of happened during the lockdowns was an emphasis on going online for church. And a lot of churches have shifted in that direction. But I think a lot of churches have realized it doesn't really work. Because we need fellowship. Now, if there is
face-to-face fellowship.
If there is a need for online contact because of lockdowns or whatever, that's fair enough. And it's okay to have hybrid programs where others can join online if they want to. But I think for us to start moving away from fellowship is lethal for church, for the church, for the mission of the church. It's totally lethal.
Paul writes that it is, especially as we see the day approaching.
Yeah, exactly. We must have fellowship together, and we must have that togetherness that comes with functioning as a corporate entity, because that's what the church is.
So what you're talking about is really that you're bringing the church members into unity with God and with God's purpose. But there is diversity within the church that you are really tapping into, aren't you?
You know,
so take us through this unity and diversity idea.
What's so amazing is that all these issues that were so prominent in the church have just gradually dropped away. Now, there are still issues that pop up, but the church deals with those issues as something that's kind of foreign to mission. It is not central anymore. In the past, mission and the church were issues and the mission of the church were intertwined. They seem to be the same thing. But as time's gone by, those issues have become a side issue, something on the side which has to be dealt with, but not central to the church anymore.
Not focused on.
And the church is no longer focused, and it makes the church stronger. And like you said, unity and diversity. What happens in a church that's actually focusing on mission is it becomes attractive to people from various backgrounds.
You're setting up a background for people that want to feel they want to be part of it.
It actually creates an attraction for people who are quite different from each other, because all of them are feeling fulfilled. Whereas if you've got a sort of, a church that's a monoculture, where only one type of person, for example, only elderly people or only a certain culture, only Asians or whatever, only reaching their own people. I don't believe in that. I do not agree with that. God's church will always tend towards multicultural, will always tend to a mixture. And that's why you see the churches that are growing in most of the places in the world are multicultural, and they've got various different age groups inside. They've got different colors inside those churches. And that's what our church is becoming. It's amazing. We're starting to see different tribal entities and different people, and often we have multiple languages on a Sabbath. In our humble little church, there was a little dot on Go Island, has now become almost like a multicultural church, and is reaching out, and there's great things happening, all because we started this whole thing about getting the church back on track with its own purpose and its own mission. And that requires servant leadership to implement. You can't implement the true mission of the church without servant leadership. Servant leadership is actually required to make it happen, because only a servant leader will actually be able to invite and get everybody involved. So that's what I believe is can happen in any church. Now that I've seen it happen in our church, I believe any church, if there's any church that feels like maybe there's some viewer that's feeling discouraged about their church, and there's, you know what, people who are in a discouraged church are discouraged people. And
can be discouraging.
It's very discouraging to be in a discouraging church. So if there's any viewers out there who are involved in a church and they feel like this church is going nowhere, it has no purpose, it has no sense of direction, ask God to make you into a servant leader so that you can actually bring the spirit of mission, the spirit of servant leadership into that church and implement a strong focus on mission and bringing the sense of purpose to the church, because without that, it's going to continue. It's like that saying, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting the same result. Nothing happens if you do the same old thing. So we're going to have to change. It's kind of like a revolutionary feeling, but it's all based on God's word, and it's based on truth and righteousness. And we're not talking about sort of deviating from mission. No, we're focusing on mission. We've got to have the right lifestyle, the right message, and the right mission if we're going to fulfill the purpose that God has for us.
You see, when you're talking about unity in diversity, too many people have the idea that means, well, you can believe this thing and I'll believe that thing, but we'll be united. We can't be united if we don't agree on doctrine. With biblical doctrine, that has to be the foundation. You can't have anything else that you base your faith, your church, your unity on anything other than the Word of God. But there's the diversity, as you said, within tribe, within culture, within colour, within age.
There is inevitable
all these things
diversity.
are the diversity.
But we need to unite on the same lifestyle, the same message, and the same mission. It's more than doctrine. It's actually mission as well, and lifestyle. Those three things are what unite people. But we can have all the colours in the rainbow. We can have all the different tribes. We need that central core of a common lifestyle, common message,
unity
and a common
on those
mission,
things.
which is what this church has.
And we're going to take a break now, and we're talking with Dr. Mark Turnbull, and I'm sure you're finding it very interesting. Well, I am, because, you know, I sometimes think about mission like going overseas, but mission begins in the church. There's mission in the church to accomplish.
Well, it begins in your home.
And that's what we're talking about. So if you would like to contact Dr. Mark Turnbull, or you want to support the ministry that he's involved in there in Vanuatu, just take note of this address, and I'm sure he'll be happy to hear from you.
If you'd like to contact Dr. Mark Turnbull and support the work of Wings of Hope in Vanuatu, you may do so in the following ways. Their mailing address is 51 Southlink Street, Parkinson, Queensland 4115. That's 51 Southlink Street, Parkinson, Queensland 4115. Email them on 𝗧𝗵𝗍𝗀@gmail.com. That's the number 4, his hope, all one word, @gmail.com. You can donate to them via their website. The address is www.forhishope.com/give. Contact them today.
I hope you wrote those details down, because I'm sure Mark would love to hear from you.
Sure.
We like to hear from our viewers, so I think it'd be a blessing to him. And tell him how much you've enjoyed the information he's been giving to us, not just in this program, but in the previous one as well on servant leadership, because I found that really, really helpful. Now, Mark, I have a question. what was your role in all of this? How did you find your role in all this, the purpose of the church, or your purpose within that work of the church?
That is such an important question, because all of us need to have a purpose within the purpose of the corporate entity of our church. If we're working within a church and we want that church to be alive and to have focus, we have to know our purpose, our micro purpose, which is our role, if you like, which fits into the big picture of the purpose of the church. And that church fulfills a role in the mission of the worldwide church, doesn't it?
That's right,
Yes.
yes.
So it's kind of like circles within circles. And so we as individuals need to ask God to help us to have the spirit of mission, to have the spirit of servant leadership, and to ask us to plan our lives strategically as well in order to fulfill our role. So we can't look at others and say, you're not fulfilling your role, when we haven't even dealt with our own role. So we need to ask God to give us the spirit of mission and to focus on the part that we can play. Now, for me, it was the work of an elder. And I think an elder is a key person in a local church. And I think it's a privilege to be involved in that role. But everybody's called with different gifts, and not everybody can fulfill the same role. So it's a case of praying and asking God to lead you. The leadership of the church is always given to you. You never take it on by yourself. Nobody says, I'm going to be the elder of the church. People have to invite you and have to ask you to do that. And it's the same thing with all the positions. And in the church, we all have to ask God to show us our will.
And the important thing is we've got to be willing to do use that gift in the church, because often people are pushed into positions that they're not really suited for, and so it creates another issue. But the willingness needs to be there.
I think it's good, though, that God has all these different jobs for people to do within the church, so that everybody can find a niche somewhere.
That's it. Yeah, as long as we have the spirit of servant leadership, God can prepare us for the work that He wants us to do.
It's very good. Yeah, you know, we've enjoyed talking to you on this subject, Mark, and you know, I want to tell the viewers we're going to be talking to Mark a couple of more times. And I think as the program develops and you learn more about what God is calling you to do, in particular into servant leadership, you taking the step, because God can't bless until you first take that step. And I think it's very important. I want to thank you for joining us, and until next time, may God richly bless you.